Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Cam?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? Pocket politics with Phill and Cam. Why? Why are we doing this?
I think it's gonna matter.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
My own views, I want to see the Republicans get away from the social issues.
I'm not saying that Republicans are idiots.
So you hear something like that, it's powerful.
As an American, I was disgusted.
You could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well.
I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you.
Again, well, with the facts, this is true. Everybody knows
What
it.
facts?
So-
What facts? Who does this hurt more, Republicans or Democrats?
Boy, I've been thinking about that.
Welcome back to Pocket Politics. Cameron, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Phil, did you know tonight is our 25th episode?
It is, yeah. We're a quarter of the way to 100, so pretty exciting there. So decent news week. We thought it was going to be pretty slow, but it looks like we've got plenty to talk about tonight.
All right, yeah, definitely a lot in the news this week. We had the Georgia runoff, certainly more Trump news, some actions going on with the Trump organization. He made some comments this week about the Constitution that have definitely made the news, some more classified document drama with him. We're going to talk some about some potential caucus changes with the Democrats. They're looking to shake things up a little bit with how they select their candidates. Big thing in the news this week was Brittany Griner and her getting freed from Russian captivity. And then we also had a shakeup in the U.S. Senate with Kyrsten Sinema, who decided she no longer wants to be a Democrat. She's going to be an independent. So, Phil, looks like we got a lot to talk about tonight. Why don't we get started?
All right, so down to Georgia. Tuesday we had the runoff for the Georgia Senate race between Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. And it was decided pretty quickly. We definitely didn't have to stay up late for this one. Pretty much followed the mold. But I will say this is now the fifth election that Raphael Warnock has won in 2 years. Good for him. He comes out victorious and will be in the Senate for 6 years now.
It was called fairly quickly. I think it was called right around 10 o'clock Eastern time, so a couple hours after the polls closed. He pulled it off with just shy of 3%, so he won with 51% and some change. Not a huge margin of victory, but certainly enough to get it done and enough for them to call it. When the polls first closed, they were going back and forth with who was in the lead as they were counting the different counties. But in the end, Warnock took it. It was interesting watching the runoff go down. I mean, the different strategies that they had, that the two candidates used leading up to this runoff. Walker kind of beat the same drum that he had been beating all along through the summer, and then Warnock kind of still hit the airwaves, and he made it a real point to get out there and try and visit as many counties in Georgia as he could, even getting out to some very red rural counties where people weren't even expecting to see him, and he still made it a point to go out there, trying to get his message out, trying to see if he could drum up support in every corner of the state. And so it ended up paying off for him, I should say. His strengths came through. He was also championing the fact that he was ready to work across the aisle, not just with Democrats, trying to build his coalition. He's playing off the fact that he says he's the 18th most bipartisan senator out there and such. So, yeah, Warnock worked hard on this one. Again, Walker he had a lot of baggage to deal with, got the whole Trump cloud hanging over him, and at the end, Warnock takes it.
Yeah, and while, just over 1.7 million people in Georgia still voted for a guy whose, major issue leading up to the runoff was whether you would want to be a vampire or a werewolf. I'm blown away by the fact, I know we were both pretty happy with the fact that there was a lot of split ticket voting that we saw all across the midterms, but I'm blown away that or 1.7 million people in Georgia still voted for what perhaps is one of the worst Senate candidates on the planet. I mean, the guy was an awful candidate. He never really talked about real issues. All his sound bites are crazy speeches about, moving polluted air to China and ridiculous other stuff. He's got a pretty crazy past of domestic violence, other stuff in there too as well. And turns out we find out in the weeks leading up that he didn't even really live in Georgia, so he was playing the whole Dr. Oz game where you just go somewhere to run for office but don't really live there. What I will say though is
many
that
politicians have done that.
I agree, but what I will say is that Warnock's campaign, stayed away from almost all of that. Which was really interesting. They kind of took the high road as far as the campaign was, and then they let other organizations that weren't really affiliated with his campaign do all the, the mudslinging for him. So he didn't really have to do that. And I think that was an interesting take, and I definitely think it helped him in the long run because he wasn't out there trashing Herschel Walker and doing all those things that normally happens between two candidates.
So he did a little bit. He was throwing some subtle jabs in here and there. But he wasn't, over the top with them, I suppose. But I want to touch on the point you brought up about the number of people that still voted for Herschel Walker, because it's Georgia, and that's a red state, and people down there wanted a Republican, and someone with an R next to their name was the person they were looking for, and it did help Herschel Walker, I think, that he had Brian Kemp working across the state for him. Kemp being a very popular Republican in Georgia who keeps winning elections and such. So that's what it was. People down there are looking for a Republican candidate. And again, going back to the whole candidate quality thing, I mean, had there been a different candidate on there, I think we'd very well be talking about a Republican having picked up this seat. So we'll see going forward as to, how candidate quality plays into 2024 and beyond. But I mean, it was a factor in this last election. It would certainly be hard to deny that.
Yeah, and I will say that you mentioned Governor Kemp. One of the interesting things too, and I don't know if you were watching or what programming you were watching, but looking at kind of Steve Kornacki's breakdown on Tuesday night, and he was kind of putting up these charts and just showing that even in the red, the reddest parts of Georgia, the very red communities outside of the cities and outside of Atlanta, Herschel Walker was not hitting anything close to Kemp's numbers, and so what do you think that is? Do you think that's a little bit of, lack of turnout, or is that people were legitimately dissuaded by, him being such a poor candidate? Or do you think it was the Trump factor or a combination of all three? What are your thoughts?
I would say probably a combination of all three. I think the candidate quality definitely matters. Turnout, that probably came about or was down maybe because of the fact that the Republicans weren't going to pick up the Senate either way. That may have crushed some momentum there. The Trump factor, I would kind of throw that in with the candidate quality. But again, to your point earlier, Georgia was another state where we saw split ticket voting occur. I mean, I'm not saying we pull up these numbers again. I'm just trying to go off the top of my head. But I think Kemp won his race by like 8 points. Didn't he, Phil? Somewhere around there, 8 or 7, 8, 9 points, something like that.
It was close to 10. Yeah. I mean, it was a high margin.
Yeah. And then Walker goes down by basically 3 points. So there was definitely, yet again, another state where that split ticket voting happens. And which, to your point that you said in an earlier episode, just shows that there are still more Americans than we probably realize that do research their candidates and vote based on candidates' advice, whether someone has an R or D next to their name.
Yeah, which I think is healthy, and there probably needs to be more of. I heard I got a couple of points, so I don't want to forget about them, but real quick I'll veer off. I heard an interview with Andrew Yang this week. And he was kind of talking about some of that stuff. He's like, when you just get, one choice, based on your party, and you don't, it's always a two-party thing. It's not, people don't get the chance to really elect people that they really want. It's just kind of there's two people that they don't like being forced down their throat. And he,
Yeah.
is talking about how that's not healthy and that, more and more states are starting to move towards a ranked choice voting system. And that needs to keep going because that could actually help, third party members and people who are kind of actually better candidates as a whole, be electable. Either way, really interesting interview. I do want to say too, though,
Phil, real quick, can I just touch on something really quick there you brought up? I think is interesting. You talk about the two-party system. Let's not forget, most other developed nations in the world have more than two parties. Like, we're fixated on this two-party system, but you start looking at a lot of these European countries and such, like, they have a plethora of parties from which to choose. And here we are with just the two. So it does bring up an interesting dynamic or make an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you bring that up because I was looking at how the English Parliament works a couple weeks ago randomly because I was curious. And they have like 11 prominent parties. Now, the Tories, of which are the biggest ones, but it's not uncommon for Tories that are just vastly disliked to be knocked off in Parliament seats in England, either in the House of Commons or the House of Lords by one of these other 11 parties. It's nuts how that works. So I do think Andrew Yang had a really good point. The other thing I was going to talk about too is that it goes to show you what candidate quality will do, right? Because in 2020, you had two Democrats running for Senate, one of them being Raphael Warnock, the other John Ossoff. And both of their opponents were pretty low quality candidates. I mean, Kelly Loeffler was a terrible candidate, and Perdue was already disliked in the state. I mean, people already did not like that guy. Why it was the Republican Party's push as a whole to get those people on the ticket, I don't know. And then they go back and put up Herschel Walker, who you got to tell me there's a better candidate in Georgia, for a Senate seat. It's pretty interesting how that all plays out. But what you end up with is a predominantly red state. I think you would say a very red state with two Senate seats going to Democrats because of multiple years they're putting these terrible candidates up. It's just not helping them down in Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I fully agree that Loeffler and Perdue were terrible candidates, but not maybe the caliber candidate that the Republicans should be putting up, I guess. And yeah, I mean, it is. It's given, as you just said it's given a relatively red or a traditionally red state, I should say, two blue senators and then still a Republican governor. So, I mean, again, kind of interesting how the state is kind of splitting there.
You say that you wouldn't necessarily agree with the quality, but look, David Perdue's been beat as many times as Beto O'Rourke, if not more. He is not an election winner.
Yeah, that's a low blow there, Phil. Like that's yeah. I mean,
hey,
again,
I both sides that one. I got I got Beto in there too.
That's why I said it's wow. Yeah, I mean, we could go on and on with it, but I think the takeaway here and stuff I've been reading and such is there's a lot of churn within the Republican Party now, looking at candidate quality. I'll be interested to see what comes out in 2024. Now, Georgia will not have any Senate races in 2024, but just the election as a whole in 2024, which, before we know it, it feels like that's going to be here and we'll be talking about it. But yeah, I mean, moving forward, we'll see. We talked about candidate quality a lot. I mean, we've heard Mitch McConnell and some others, talking about it. So at the end of the day, Warnock wins the race. He's got 6 years as a senator for the state of Georgia, Phil. And yeah, so anything else on that one before we transition to your favorite news of the week?
Yeah, so real quick, I still got a couple more things on this one. So it should be noted, too, that with this win, one, the Democrats are going to have an advantage in every seat in the Senate committees, right? Or every single Senate committee. I mean, and they will. So they'll probably...
I just meant maybe because we do have something to talk about at the end of the show there that mixes things up slightly.
Well, yeah, true, but... So hold
off on that one.
Yeah, we shall see. But as of right now, they should have a majority in Senate committees. Hopefully, that will allow them to do some things a little bit quicker, which as a whole is good because it's just more progress in general. It's things getting done in the government, and that's, I think, Democrat or Republican, that's what you want to see. The other thing is that with that win, it almost, if not definitely, it almost guarantees there will be no Senate filibuster proof majority for Republicans in the Senate in 2024 or 2026. There's pros and cons of that, no matter which side of the aisle you are on. That could be good or bad. I think in general, it's probably going to be what we've seen over the past couple years, where it stalls stuff from getting done because they can't get over to that 60 vote threshold. Now, moving on to my favorite topic of the week. This week, President Trump, the former president, his company that he owns along with his family, was convicted of 17 felony convictions related to tax fraud and various other crimes in the trial. Do you have any initial thoughts on this one?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the 17 counts. I mean, they could be facing a $1.6 million fine is what I saw on this one. We'll see this actual sentencing from this come about on January 13th, but the president and his children are not charged with anything in this one. So, I mean, the company taking a real shot, but the former president seems to be almost unscathed in this one, at least. Well, I mean, obviously the pocketbook will be affected, but at the end of the day, I mean, yeah, yet again, nothing really sticking to the guy.
Yeah, however, there is some interesting takeaways from this because, the prosecution's case at the end, and if you go back and listen to the closing arguments, were largely based on the fact that this was not some accountant or the chief financial officer that guy who was already kind of in trouble, and they had been working with the prosecution. This was not an error of their behalfs, right? This was not an anomaly. Everything that was being done here was being done with the knowledge and consent of the former president. And so they made that case pretty well, and they got a jury to vote guilty, and not just guilty on some charges, but guilty on all of them. So we've got everything from scheme to defraud in the first degree, criminal tax fraud in the third and fourth degrees. I mean, there's falsifying business record charges in here, and multiple of them. And then they got two arms of the corporation too. So some of the charges are for the Trump Corporation as whole, and then some of them are for the payroll corporation, which is basically just the arm that they use to pay employees. Again, a bunch of similar stuff: falsifying business records, multiple counts, and criminal tax fraud in the first, third, and fourth degree. So there's a lot of people out there, and again, I'm not going to hold my breath on this one because we've said it before, but there's a lot of people out there who think that this could be kind of the sign that all these other cases we're looking for is a jury willing to convict. And if this is a canary, then largely Trump could be very far down the coal mine.
Yeah, I'm going to go with no. Nothing seems to stick with him. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, yeah, there's fines, etc. Alan Weisselberg is going to take the heat on this one, but yeah, I don't see it affecting Trump in the long run. I could be wrong. I mean, who knows? It's so hard to predict anything with Trump, but I mean, definitely there. He did have some other things though coming out too, with his little comments on the Constitution. Phil, what did you think on that?
Yeah, so I think he's generally a sore loser and an idiot. And so he has this fake version of Twitter that he uses because he, for up until recently couldn't use Twitter because was banned. But he goes on there and makes these rants, and he said something about he's still upset about his election in 2020,
yep.
And that in order to fix this, you would basically have to. What did he say? I think he said the words he used was terminate the Constitution.
I've got it right here, Phil. So he does talk about the massive fraud and deception, et cetera, et cetera. Then he goes on to say, a massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution, end quote.
Yeah, and so of course, again, I'm just surprised that enough people pay attention to this stuff for that to be news. But it is. I mean, that's the only place he can go to put his stuff out, and so people pay attention to it. Some Republicans came out and condemned it. I just don't know where to go with this. So and at the same time as we're getting this news, it's leaking now that federal investigators found more classified documents in fairly unsecured places outside of Mar-a-Lago. I guess it was a storage unit that he held that and they found more stuff there. There's probably some that are buried with Ivana. Who knows?
Well, that was investigators that were hired by Trump's lawyers were the ones that actually found that in that Florida storage unit on that. You talked about some of the heat that Trump's been facing. He has been facing more and more heat, though, from within the Republican Party. Mitch McConnell came out with some pretty strong words. Phil, why don't we play the clip on that one?
First, let me just say that anyone seeking the presidency who thinks that the Constitution could somehow be suspended or not followed, it seems to me would have a very hard time being sworn in as President of the United States.
There you go. So that is what Mitch McConnell had to say. And, he wasn't the only one, but there was not a lot of people coming out,
No, but
and kind of scolding the guy.
I will say, though, Phil, I'm seeing more and more come out. I mean, John Cornyn actually came out against him, which we haven't really been seeing that. John Thune had some harsh words for him, John Thune being out of South Dakota. Pat Toomey was attacking him yet again. He had a pretty good rant after the midterms here a few weeks back, and he's not holding back at all. He recently just said, and I'll just read this quote really quick, as he's attacking Trump, "The facts of the election in 2022 are just indisputable. The ultra pro-Trump, handpicked by Trump based on loyalty to Trump, those candidates wildly underperformed. It's pretty clear he's become a toxic force, and that's going to diminish his influence a lot," end quote. So he is getting pushed back. Again, not every single person in the party is pushing back on him, but Phil, I think you'd agree with me. Each time that he makes the news, we start to see maybe one or two prominent Republicans coming out against him. Would you agree with that? We're starting to see more.
I mean, I would agree. We're starting to see some. I don't know that it just doesn't seem like they really want to get rid of him. It's like, I think they're caught in this weird world where they know that he still is a major influence on about, probably 40 to 50% of their own party, if not more. Could be upwards of 60%. And so I think that a lot of them just feel they need to tread lightly on this one because, this is a split in the Republican Party. I mean, I've said it multiple times before. The Republican Party looks more and more like a two-tent party. It's the ones who are willing to kowtow to Trump and the normal ones who see that, this guy is not good and healthy for the country.
Well, so I will say this. At the end of the day, politicians want to win elections. And with Trump and with this news and everything that's been going on with him, right, we're seeing more and more, as I said, senators and such speaking out against him. But you're also starting to see movement in the polls. I mean, there was a poll this week that I saw that had Ron DeSantis beating Trump easily in Florida. Now, granted, that is DeSantis' own state. But still, Phil, I think there's more and more movement with some of these other potential presidential candidates. And I think as you start to see people shifting from Trump, I think you'll see more and more people speaking out against him. But you should probably never count this guy out because he has proven to be hard to beat before. So, I mean, again, it's something we're going to have to wait and see how it plays out in the next year or two. But yeah, I mean, comments that he's having or that he's making about the Constitution and some of these legal woes that keep going on and on, I mean, they are piling up. He seems to be having one bad week after another.
Yeah, but, if Republicans really wanted to, make a stance, they should have realized shortly after, they should have realized the week after November 8th in 2020, and they had their opportunity to put this away. And now, they're all complaining and they're out there on TV saying, we need to do something different. This guy is hurting our electability. in several places, all across the country. And they're just not doing it. It's like if January 6th didn't teach them enough, they seem to be willing to make the same mistake over and over again.
At the end of this, all politicians want to win elections. And I think they are moving forward with this. I think we're going to see a strong showing by the Republican Party in 2024. I think the Trump thing is the elephant in the room, along with a couple other social issues that they've got to kind of work through. But again, get Trump out of the way. I think 2024 looks very, very favorable for Republicans to take the White House, the Senate, and, dare I say, a red wave coming in 2024. But there are some hurdles to get over, so we'll see if they can get over them.
All right. Any more on Trump?
No, I think, though, since we're talking about elections, Phil, why don't we take a look at this potential caucus shakeup here that the Democrats are looking at doing?
Yeah, so it looks like they're talking about trying to switch things up so that now South Carolina and, South Carolina, I believe, followed by New Hampshire, will be the first caucuses as opposed to Iowa, which we've had for quite some time now. I know it's been talked about that, they're looking for a more diverse state to kind of set off the Democratic primaries. I don't know if this goes anywhere. I'm really not sure a lot about, maybe we should have done some push-ups on this to figure out where and how this is all decided on.
So
I don't know that this is really that big of a deal in the first place, or that it's even going to happen.
So I've got a couple takes on it. First of all, let's just kind of establish what it is that they're proposing. So they do want South Carolina to go first, and what they're proposing is that they would go on February 3rd, which would be a Saturday. So I guess that'd be February 3rd of 2024. And then 3 days later, New Hampshire and Nevada would follow them up. And then shortly after that, Georgia would do theirs on February 13th, and then Michigan on February 27th. So with this proposal, Iowa's out of the picture. Or I say out of the picture, out of this early, out of the early stages, if you will. Do I think it's huge news? I mean, not really. This has got to get approval. This has got to be the DNC working with these various states to get all of this done. At the end of the day, Phil, and I've said this to you before, I mean, the parties are going to get their candidates, whether it means South Carolina goes first, Iowa goes first, whatever. I will say this, though, strategically for the Democrats, I can see this, I guess, on both sides. They say they want to go more diverse. But I think from the Democrats' perspective, they've already got the diversity, if you will, in their voting. I think where the Democrats have been struggling, and they seem to be falling off more and more in these elections, is in places like the Midwest, or Iowa, I should say, right? Rural, working class, white voters, et cetera. We keep hearing about, how they're drifting more towards Trump. And so, again, while I don't know that this makes a huge deal, I don't know that this helps them there either. And so, I almost think they would be better off just kind of leaving it alone as it was and trying to appeal to the Iowa Democrats that are still there, and especially try and appeal to those that maybe they're trying to bring back into the party, or young voters there, et cetera. So, I mean, there's certainly strategy at play. I don't know if I think it's a good move, but again, I'm not a member that, or I'm not on the DNC, and I'm not out there making these decisions. So, I mean, those are just my thoughts on all this.
I guess on I do kind of understand. I mean, I get it, but Iowa's largely not a very democratic state anyway. And so if they want the primary system to look more like their electorate, I kind of understand this, because if you look at what we're seeing them basically go to states that are swingier and have an impact more so than they did 10 to 12 years ago. So I can understand that. I did hear something about how these states have a lot of stuff about their primaries and how they conduct elections within the state. And those caucuses and things like that, they have that written into their state constitutions. And so the example I heard was New Hampshire. And basically, because of the way that it's written in the New Hampshire's state constitution, is no matter what the party wants to do, theirs is not going to move anyway. Because if the DNC wants to try and shift these things up and move dates around and stuff like that, it's just not going to work for New Hampshire. So
Yeah, it can't work quick anyway. It would take some time. And I think that's why they've got New Hampshire still sitting there 3 days after South Carolina. Because let's remember, New Hampshire always goes within a few days of Iowa, or traditionally has.
it's like largely for the most part, whoever wins in Iowa is going to be the candidate. And so what they don't want is a state that is not very Democratic leaning in the first place to kind of be the initial decider. And so I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea. Like, just like everything else in the world, we need to update things as times change. And I get that. I just don't know if this is really going to hold any traction.
So a couple of things real quick before we shift gears. I will say this to your point about you want a diverse voting block, et cetera. I mean, I hear you on that. I will say this, though. Iowa, while it may be fairly red now, has traditionally been a little more blue or maybe purple, I should say. And so I think there could be potentially room for Democrats to try and get back into that once upon a time coalition they had in Iowa. And the other thing is, fine, you want to shift away to a more competitive Democrat state. Why are you choosing South Carolina? That's a very, very red state. Now, I sometimes wonder if maybe that's not Biden paying back Clyburn a favor in South Carolina for his endorsement when he was
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that take as well.
Because let's face it, Biden was pretty down and out. I mean, he lost Iowa and I think he'd lost New Hampshire too. I'd have to go back and look, but he was not sitting real well. And then they got to South Carolina. Clyburn had endorsed him not too long before the South Carolina primary, and then things really changed for Biden. So part of me wonders if he's not just giving a little bit of political playback to Representative Clyburn there.
I think there's less, when you say wonder, I think there's less speculation there and more like we kind of all know that's the case.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know for a fact, but I mean, I'm just, again.
Without saying it, without saying it, why, if you wanted to pick a real diverse Democratic stronghold to kind of be the leader, South Carolina is nobody's first pick.
No. You know who probably could have been a solid choice for them to go first is the state of Minnesota, considering they have voted, I think, the last 50 years for Democrats in the presidential election. Democrats all over the state. So I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of surprised Minnesota, while maybe they don't want to go first with Minnesota, I would have thought Minnesota would have garnered some early attention in there because Minnesota's been a pretty blue state for a long time.
Yeah, and again, this really involves the kind of the caucusing and the selection of the candidate that will be too. So I don't know if all states are on the table, but yeah, Minnesota's a perfect example. Very diverse voting bloc, right? Also historically Democratic in the recent history.
And it would let them keep a Midwest connection as well.
Absolutely, right? Other states come to mind. It's like, oh, you want something that's diverse and overwhelmingly Democratic. What about New York? Now granted, that's really just based on the city and the surrounding areas. But we could use all kinds of example. Illinois comes to mind.
I was going to say Illinois. I mean, they've got Michigan up there going a few states down, but Michigan may be more purple, I guess. But yeah, I mean, there's several of them. California, Phil, what about California? I mean, you want a Democratic stronghold. There you go, California. So Hawaii, we could go on and on. At the end of the day, though, like I said, the DNC will figure this out. They also have some work to do, though, to work with these different states to change things around. We'll see. I don't know that it's huge news because, like I said, at the end of the day, I think their candidate is going to be who it's going to be. So anything else?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was just gonna reaffirm what you said. At the end of the day, we're just playing with largely the semantics and the details around this, and they're gonna get who they want. I mean, regardless of what state hosts it, if Biden decides to run, he's gonna be the candidate.
Correct. This becomes a bigger thing if Biden decides not to run, and then they're shuffling around trying to figure a candidate out. Obviously, in 2024.
Exactly. With that being said, let's move on. So big news this week in kind of foreign relations. We had a prisoner swap. So the basketball player Brittany Griner was brought home from Russia towards the end of this week. and feelings are mixed, right?
Yeah, so I mean, you say the feelings mixed. They definitely are. I'll just say I saw a poll here. Let's see, this one's from News Nation. This Chris Cuomo had this on, I think, last night. This is 22% of the people polled strongly agree that it was a good deal bringing her home. 15% somewhat agree. 15% somewhat disagree. 37% strongly disagree that it was a good exchange, and then 11% have no strong opinion at all. My own takes. At the end of the day, I'm happy that she's out of prison in Russia, because I don't want to see any United States citizen imprisoned overseas in a place like Russia or Iran or any of these nations like that. So, you know, I'm happy.
Specifically a country that we're in a proxy war with, like,
yeah.
you know.
Well, yeah, and well, I mean, you could say the same to an extent with Iran, etc. But yes, going back to your point on Russia, yes. So I'm happy to see that. Personally, I'm not real happy with the deal. For a couple of reasons. One, I think this Victor Boot sounds like an awful person, Merchant of Death or whatever his nickname is. I mean, he doesn't sound like a guy I want to have over for dinner tonight to meet my family. I mean, he sounds like a pretty awful guy. And so I personally, for what he has done in the past, from what I've read about, I would have liked to have seen us get a little more. I mean, I would have liked to have seen us get Paul Whelan out of there. And there's another gentleman, Mark Fogel, as well, who is imprisoned over there in Russia, that I would have liked to have seen all of them come home. I also understand that there is a lot that goes into negotiations and back and forth with all this. So, yeah, I mean, kind of my thoughts there. I will say really quick, Phil, for those of our listeners that don't know who Mark Fogel is, and I would imagine it's probably most of our listeners, I put an article up on our Facebook page that actually talks about this man. He's a 60-some-year-old guy, I think he's 61, teacher, and he was teaching over at a English-speaking school over there in Russia, and traveling back and forth to the United States. He's actually got or had a medical prescription for marijuana from a doctor in, I think, Pennsylvania. And he was home in Pennsylvania, got some medical marijuana, had like just under half an ounce on him, and traveled back to Russia to his job to teach. And he gets stopped at the airport. He tries to show the authorities over there in Russia his whole prescription card, etc. And at the end of the day, the Russians weren't hearing it. Boom, grab him. He's facing, I think, 16 and a half years in a Russian prison. And so,
yeah, I mean, I think not only is weed in general illegal there, I don't think they make exceptions if you have a prescription.
Well, apparently they don't, because they weren't hearing it on Mark Fogel's thing. So, yeah, I'd like to see all these people come home. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of passion going around about this. You know, I mean, we could go on and on all night about it. There's been a lot said on various news stations. It depends on what news station you're watching, I suppose, as to what drum they're beating on this. Again, I'm not really a fan of the deal. The other thing, though, that I'm a little nervous about, Phil, and I think a lot of people are too, is the fact now that we've cut a deal, right, wrong, or indifferent, we have cut a deal, is the potential now for some of these other pariah nations to look at this as, oh, man, here's a bargaining chip now. Let's start taking United States citizens hostage or prison, you know, imprison them for something, and then we'll start to cut the deals with the United States. So I'm really nervous about this one. I'm happy she's out. I want to see the other ones out, but I'm not real happy with this deal overall.
Yeah, and obviously a big part of the problem is we don't necessarily have the upper hand with this, but you're exactly right when you talk about, other pariah nations. I mean, but I won't say that's a new thing. I mean, even though it kind of looks a little bit like that, we don't negotiate with terrorists kind of mantra that, was big back in the 90s and 2000s and stuff. This is not a new thing. I mean, North Korea had that guy hostage for a while. If I remember right, that guy came back like completely emaciated and then even died like a couple weeks after he got back. So this has definitely happened before. This is not a new thing. There was a Russian statement that came out about, that they weren't willing to give up Paul Whelan because the charge of spying is way more. And then people are talking about speculation that they're looking for us to work with Germany to get a guy out of Germany, who is a Russian spy to trade for Paul Whelan. So we don't really have the upper hand in this one. But when you, again, to go back to the other nations, I read an article today too that said that, despite what happened to Brittany Griner, a lot of other WNBA stars are still going overseas to play their off season, right, and make a little bit more money. And the disturbing part about this is that we've seen kind of a trend in Turkey with President Erdogan of some of this Putin-like behavior. Obviously siding with him, on some UN issues and stuff like that. And so we've kind of seen a little bit of an authoritarian movement in Turkey as well. And it turns out that Turkey also has one of the largest female basketball leagues in the world. And so a lot of these players are going over there. So I could see something like this potentially happening in another country as well. It's unfortunate. Yeah. I agree with you at the end of the day. I'm happy to see Americans coming home. Now, do I know why she came home before the other people? Of course, yes, because we know who she is, right? She's a public figure. She's a prominent athlete, probably the greatest female basketball player of her time, especially since, Sue Bird's recently retired. But I understand totally. I mean, it's a high profile, high visibility issue.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what's got some people upset, right? People are looking at like Mark Fogel and saying, hey, this guy's basically over there on the same charge. He's been there 9-10 months longer. He still sits there. We barely heard his name. And yet Griner's name is talked about all the time. Yeah. That's what's making this thing tricky. That's what's got a lot of people upset about this one. Because there are families out there, like I said, whether it be Paul Whelan, Mark Fogel, et cetera, that do look at these things and are asking the questions why. And why, I mean, that is a fair question for people to ask. What is driving or determining the order of how we bring prisoners home? And me personally, just because you're a celebrity, I don't think that should trump anyone. I mean, at the end of the day, I would like to kind of think you go by the order of how long they've been there. And if Whelan is off the table because of his charges being different, then yet again, I'm going to default back to this Mark Fogel and say, well, then why weren't we pushing to get Fogel out? Heck, we've hardly even heard Mark Fogel's name. No,
I agree with you. I mean, I don't think you or I had heard his name until either today or yesterday, right? So I do, share some sentiment on that. Like, it would be nice if it was a fair, based on time served and stuff. The Russian statement came out, the whatever diplomat, basically, I already mentioned that. So we know why Whelan was kind of not in the negotiation in the first place. But, we don't always know the circumstances. I just know that there is more pressure for somebody who people, know and recognize and who is in the news and has a profile around the country, as opposed to a guy that literally you and I never heard of until the last, 24 hours. With that being said, I do have a clip. So this was Chris Coons in an interview this week. I'll go ahead and play that, and then we can digest.
Look, any day that an American is released from being unjustly imprisoned overseas and returns home is a great day. So I think all Americans should celebrate the return of Brittany Griner to the United States today. It's clear from what Secretary Blinken and others have said, what President Biden said, that Vladimir Putin was offering a one-for-one swap, was not willing to give up Paul Whelan. And despite how hard the Secretary of State and many others tried, that was just not a deal that was on the table. Let's not forget that what's really going on here is that Vladimir Putin is unjustly arresting and imprisoning Americans. There is a lot of finger pointing in our nation's capital today. I just wish folks could find it in their heart to be happy for Brittany Griner's family and for this American to have returned home. President Biden is determined to get Paul Whelan out. He's been imprisoned since the previous president and it is very difficult to get Americans released from foreign prisons.
All right, so that was Chris Coons this week discussing it. I think just like we heard from Mitt Romney, people for the most part are just happy that we're getting Americans home, and I kind of share that sentiment, and I know you mentioned that as well, Cam.
Yeah, they are. Again, but I want to be clear. I'm not thrilled with this deal, and I'm not necessarily happy that we're just taking celebrities and running with it, Vice, other people over there. I want to be clear about that. I do wish we knew or better kind of understood what the order was here and the why behind it. And I think while it's hard to necessarily relay all that, I think that would help ease some of the tension, because there's a lot of tension going about this. A lot of people are upset about Griner herself and some of the things she said in the past. And I mean, we could go on and on about debating all that. But
yeah, but at the end of the day, you can be upset about people. That's everybody's entitled to be upset about something somebody else said, and people are entitled to say upsetting things, right? She certainly has not said the most upsetting things, right? She didn't. She's not a former president that said on social media, she wants to terminate the Constitution.
No,
right?
but
so my point being though is that. While yes, some of the things she said is controversial, at the end of the day, it's bringing an American home. I think, Abe Lincoln got out there and kind of talked about it as well. So, just said, hey, this is what we were working with, and this is what we were able to get. So we took it and we brought an American home.
Yeah, I mean, Tony Blinken, yeah, he said those kind of things. But again, Phil, to be fair, she has said some pretty heinous things. But again, we could go on and on about all that.
I'd say your definition of heinous probably differs quite a bit from mine. I mean, but either way, let's not get spun into that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. For the sake of time, I think at the end of the day, we recognize the fact she's home. There are more deals. The president and Tony Blinken and several others from the State Department have said that they are working hard to get Paul Whelan home, and I would assume this Mr. Fogel.
and yet nobody has mentioned Mr. Fogel.
You know what, Phil? That's why I'm kind of happy to actually mention the guy on the show. I'm trying to get him a little bit of airtime here. Like, apparently his hashtag free Mark Fogel is trending on Twitter. I actually put that hashtag on our Mark Fogel story on our Facebook page again. And by the way, before we transition, ladies and gentlemen, check out that article on Facebook. It is worth a read to know about this Mr. Fogel, because we got to get the word out on this guy.
All right, moving on. Talk about controversial figures. Seems like we're doing it every week. Kyrsten Sinema, senator from Arizona, has come out this week and announced that she is no longer going to be affiliated with the Democratic Party. She is now an independent. I can't even, I don't even know that I want to start on this one. I may just turn it over to you, but good, go. Yeah, get the fuck out. I'm good. We'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Okay, I get how progressives are saying that, but I will say this about Sinema. Well, you know what? I'll start off by saying this again.
Okay, real quick, before you get started, let me just say, you say progressives are doing that. She was elected to the Senate in Arizona as a progressive.
I don't recall her.
A couple years ago, she was a part of the Green Party in Arizona. I mean, so she was elected to be a progressive, and that's what she was. And now she's not going to be an independent. She's going to be exactly what she was before, which is beholden to her financiers and the people who donate to her.
Okay. All right. Now, let me say this. Let me start off by saying, yet again, go to our Facebook page. Check out what Charlie Sykes wrote, because I put that on our page as well. He wrote an interesting article for The Bulwark where he talks about Sinema and her move. And he said, hey, Democrats, be careful what you wish for. And he goes on to talk about how Sinema was treated. The treatment being, hey, you might not always agree with someone, but you probably shouldn't just completely belittle them every chance you get. Now, I realize not every Democrat was doing that, but there were some very loud, vocal people that just wouldn't leave this woman alone. Again, I don't want to keep quoting Sykes. Go read the article. You'll see what he has to say. But I do agree with his points. I mean, let's face it. There was a couple of years ago, I say a couple of years ago, probably wasn't even that long ago, maybe a year or so ago, when Sinema had famously not voted for something that was a progressive cause or wasn't backing it or whatever. she was getting heckled so bad that hecklers followed her into the women's bathroom. And this was, at least one of the hecklers was a man who stood in there and was videoing her as she walked into a stall. And there's like toilets flushing. And I mean, that kind of stuff is uncalled for. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. At the end of the day, though, I think Sinema just had enough. Now, there's another piece to this, though, Phil. I also think Sinema's playing politics here, okay? Because she saw the writing on the wall. She was probably going to face a very stiff primary challenger in the state of Arizona here in 2024, and she would probably get primaried out. And I think she saw an avenue, interestingly enough. There's, in the state of Arizona, there are more people that are independents than are registered Democrats or Republicans. So I think the independent numbers out there is like 35% for independents and like 34 for, I don't want to say math and I'll screw it all up here, but at the end of the day, there was a slightly higher number that were independents than that were Democrats or Republicans. And she may be seeing that as her only lane. Like, look, if I want to try and stay in the Senate, let me maybe see if I can build some kind of an independent / moderate Republican, moderate Democrat coalition and get in there. I mean, that sounds good on paper. I don't see that happening, though, because let's face it. Yeah, there might be 34% say they're independents, but of that, some of them may be very far right or very far left. And some of them may always vote Republican or Democrat, but they're like, well, I'm an independent because I don't belong to either party. So I don't know that independent base is as strong as it may look. So there's that, right? So I think she's trying to shrewdly work her way back into possibly getting elected in 2024. But let's also look at it this way, Phil. If she were to run as an independent in 2024, and then, going up against a Republican and a Democrat, she could very well split the ticket with that, whoever the Democratic candidate is, and easily get the Republican elected, which, I mean, this is Arizona, Phil. Who knows who that Republican candidate could be? I mean, Carrie Lake may be on the ticket, Mark Fincham. We could go on and on, right? So, I mean, she could be ushering in Senator Carrie Lake for all we know there. Now, that's all speculation, but some of that could come about with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves on that one.
We are a little bit, but it is something, Phil, to at least think about, right? I mean, especially if she tries to run as an independent. But I wanted to touch on something else really quick here, too. Let's not forget.
You want to take this whole thing then? I mean,
well, give me a minute. I'm on a roll. Just real quick. Where's she going to caucus? That's the big question. But I will say it looks like she's going to continue caucusing with the Democrats, I think. Indications are that she wants to keep her committee seats, and to do that, I think the current seat she has, she'd have to stay Democrat. So, I mean, Phil, are you getting any indication she's going to suddenly try caucusing with the Republicans?
I don't know, but I don't get any indication that Kristen Sinema is going to do anything good for the Democratic Party. I mean, you mentioned a whole bunch of stuff. I don't even need to go back over any of that. I'll tell you though that she's not getting elected in Arizona again. I mean, she has a 16% approval rating in a recent poll in the state. 16%. I mean, that's like record low for an approval poll. People don't like her. She ran there as a progressive. She's upended multiple pieces of legislation. Look, she specifically, removed a potential tax on Wall Street investors while simultaneously taking $1 million in donations from that same base. She's like leading the donation count for from multiple industries, and they're all big bank, big finance industries, right? And she takes more than any other person in Congress, not just Democrat in Congress, but person in Congress. She, like I said, she's beholden to the people who are going to fund her campaign. And I just don't think she's electable anymore. I mean, she may think this is a good political move. I don't see it. It's like the people that voted for you to go do a job for Democrats and for progressives, and then and it's not like most people weren't happy with her before. So I don't know that this makes people any more happy with her. I just don't think it's a good move on her part, and I don't think it matters.
Well, I think she sees it though as her only political move, which is why I think she's trying to go that independent route. But like I said,
Yeah, I think it's her only political move, and she's moving back to Arizona. If if
Phil,
that's where she's going to live afterwards.
But Phil, like I said, Democrats have got to be careful, because if she runs as an independent, she will probably split that ticket. And, maybe not split it in a huge way, but she could easily siphon enough votes away to put a Republican in that seat. And like I said, that is something to watch, is how that all shakes out, because we've seen this before when prominent independents go running, they siphon votes off from one side or the other. So that is, I think, the real dynamic here to watch going forward. Besides that, where she's going to caucus politically, like I said, I think she's going to still caucus with the Democrats to try and hold her seat for the next couple of years. I already saw a thing on Fox News last night, at least on their website, about what's Joe Manchin going to do now? Is he going to split off? I put that article on the Facebook page as well, but I don't think Manchin's going anywhere. I think he's going to stay a Democrat. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. But yeah, any other thoughts? Well, cinema, Phil?
No, I was just going to say, speaking of the Facebook page, get out there, engage with us. We occasionally get some comments, and I know I try and respond to comments that people put up there. And you do as well. So go out there, engage with us if you have questions about stuff. I also wanted to mention, go to our website. From our website, you can link to our Facebook, our Instagram. You can send us an email, CameronandPhill@gmail.com, if you want to get in touch with us. And also, you can find our stuff on all places that you receive your podcasts, as well as YouTube. So Pocket Politics on YouTube. We're not that popular, so you have to scroll down a little ways to get to our channel, but you'll know it's us when you see the Capitol logo on there, and you can go there and see our episodes as well. And I think we're going to try and get some more video content up in the future. Like I said, we love the engagement, and I think with that being said, next week should be our last episode, unless there's some crazy news, and we have a couple special episodes planned over the holidays. We will let you know. On to our parting shots. What do you have this week, Cam?
So for my parting shot here this week, I just want to remind everyone that is traveling, and I know a lot of you will be for the holidays, watch your rental cars, okay? And I say this from my own personal experience, all right? This past week, I had to travel for work, and I arrived relatively late in the evening in Virginia. I say late in the evening, it was around 9 o'clock at night, to go down and pick up my rental car, only to find out that it wasn't there. And I had a reservation and everything, and still no car, and there were several other people that were in the same boat. So the rental car companies were booking cars, and yet they had none to give out. So that was not a good feeling. And I will just say it did end up working out for me, because I did get my rental car the next day. But still, that's a pretty bizarre thing to have happen when you've got something that you think is booked, and then you go to pick it up and it's not there, and the rental car company can't help you. And no other rental car company in the airport had cars either. So it was a big, giant mess. Anyway, with people traveling, hey, watch it. And you know what? I'll say this. Probably one of the mistakes I had was that I flew kind of late that night. I had to, because I did. I had stuff I had to take care of here before I could fly out. But yeah, I mean, if you're traveling, and I know a bunch of you are going to do that over the holidays, and you need a rental car wherever you're going, try and fly early, get off that plane, get a car picked up, because the rental car companies will even tell you they get the bulk of their cars back from like 5 a.m. till noon, because that's when a lot of people come in the morning, turn cars in, and try and jump on flights. So early afternoon is actually prime time when they've actually got a pretty good sized inventory, because all those cars have come back and been cleaned. But yeah, not a fun way to start the trip. And it did end up working out for me, but I'll just throw that out there. Watch it here in this holiday season when you're traveling. Like I said, it did end up working out for me. But yeah, to all our listeners, be careful out there. Let me just say one more time, Phil, before we go, #FreeMarkFogel. Just thought I'd put that
All right. Hey, so an interesting story this week that I wanted to talk about too. You know, I've talked about the World Cup for the past couple of weeks, but this year we had some pretty sad news. Grant Wall, he's an American journalist and a soccer analyst. He's kind of basically written the book on writing about soccer and understanding that sport in the United States. So he's done a lot for U.S. soccer and the way it's perceived in this country. He died yesterday. It's kind of weird because yesterday was today in Qatar. He officially died December 10th at the age of 48, I believe. There's different stories have different date or ages, whether it's 48 or 49. But it's sad, he leaves behind a family. The other part of this is that there's starting to appear that there might be some controversy. I mean, it initially looked like it was of natural circumstances. But now it's coming to light that, when he showed up to report on the World Cup, he initially was not let into the opening game. He was wearing a shirt with a soccer ball on it that was colored similar to the LGBTQ logo and using those colors. And he had spoke out predominantly about the corruption that led to the World Cup being in Qatar in the first place. And so there was some controversy there. And then midweek, when a Filipino worker had died working on one of the stadiums in Qatar, he interviewed one of the FIFA Qatar representatives and kind of got a smug response that was pretty poor from that guy, and then wrote an expose on it and published it, and which generally probably made that guy look bad. And so now it's looking like there may have been some nefarious behavior or around this death. We don't know much yet, but it's sad nonetheless, and especially somebody that a prolific journalist and really kind of quintessential in bringing this sports popularity about in the United States. And so we will learn more, I'm sure, in the future. But rest in peace, Grant Wall. And with that being said, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's certainly always sad when we lose people, when people pass away, but it hits home extra hard when it happens right before the holidays too.
Absolutely. With that being said, I think that's all we've got for this week. But like I said, reach out to us. If you have any questions or want to hear us discuss any specific issues or speculate on what we think's going on, we'll be here and we'll talk about it. That's all I have for this week, Cam.
No, that's all I got. Another great show, folks. Thanks for listening, and until next time.
All right. Bye.